everyone. Welcome to today's webinar in partnership with Tive. My name is Katie Faulkner. I'm on the content marketing team here at FreightWaves. We're very excited to have you guys join us for today's presentation. So before we jump into the event, I would love to go ahead and go over just a couple of quick housekeeping items with you. If at any point you have any issues today, you can see the audience chat box in your console. Feel free to reach out to us there and we'll be happy to help you with any issues that may come up. Also, as the gentlemen are going through today's presentation, if you think of any questions that you'd like to ask our speakers, go ahead and send those to us in the Q&A box, which is also on your console. We'll save all those until the end. We'll have a live Q&A session after the presentation is over, and we'll get to as many of those questions as we can. So please feel free to shoot those to us at any time. All right, so very quickly, I want to introduce you guys to our speakers for today. We are very lucky to have with us Mr. David Schillingford. He is the Chief Strategy Officer and the co-founder of Everstream Analytics. He's on his 6th technology venture, and he specializes in supply chain and risk analytics. So thank you for joining us today, David. We also have Mr. Richie Daigle. He is the Enterprise Account Executive at Tive. He's also one of our former FreightWaves teammates, so we're really excited to have him with us today as well. These two are going to spend some time today sharing information with you about how to start 2023 off with the right visibility tech stack. So they're going to have a lot of great insights for you. Richie, if you want to take it away.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Thanks so much, Katie. David, it's good to see you again. I think the last time we spoke, we were in Chattanooga at F3, and if I remember correctly, I was dropping you off at an aquarium, and man, that was a good time. So it's great to see you again.
Good to see you too.
So yeah, let's see. Let's jump in. So for today's conversation, it's about visibility, but I think before we can even get into a conversation, we have to define this word, right? Like, what does visibility mean? It has so many definitions. Everybody has some visibility. It makes me think back to the "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou" movie when one of the candidates is running for office and his associates saying like, well, we need to go get some reform. Everyone's got some reform, and he's the incumbent, and then that's the joke, is that the incumbent is even wanting reform because everyone's running for reform. But it's one of these situations where everybody has some visibility, but God and the devil live in the details, and that word can mean so many different things depending on the context and where that visibility is being used. So, what does visibility mean for you, David? Like, if you were to unpack this word and all the various ways that it's being used today, all the way down to how we're going to talk about it today, what would that look like from your standpoint?
Yeah, it's a great question, because it's a word that's used as frequently as any within supply chain management, and as often as not, whoever's using it has a different thought about what it means than the last person who said it. I think at the highest level, visibility is about seeing whatever you need to be able to see to manage your supply chain, which I realize is a very broad definition. And it's different from the way that we think about transparency, which is more to do with sharing data with other people that are external to your organization to help them do whatever they need to do. And if you think about that definition, it's going to be different for a chief procurement officer than for a VP of logistics, because they need to see different things. And so, visibility should also be thought about in terms of visibility, execution visibility, and planning visibility. So as we go through today's conversation, we'll be focusing much more on logistics visibility, and within that context, much more around the execution side of logistics. But I think it's helpful just to sort of have a broad view of visibility and then narrow it down so that we can be specific. Whenever we use the word visibility, we're saying, for example, real-time transportation visibility is a much more meaningful thing to say than just visibility.
Completely agree. And, when I've been using this word awareness in place of visibility some, because I think, to me, especially in transportation, visibility, real-time transportation visibility, is all about what are you aware of? of all the various things that could go wrong, of all the different problems that can happen, how much of that are you aware of? Are there things that are coming at you that you're aware of? Are there things that are happening that you're aware of? Or is there a lag in that awareness, right? Is there a gap in between when something happens and when you find out about it? And I think the larger that gap is, the more problematic, the bigger the initial problem can be. But yeah, what are your thoughts there, just on awareness, visibility, and the gap that can exist between when something happens and when somebody finds out about it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it starts to help us narrow in on the most important question, which is, why, or so what. And as you sort of drill down into that and the different use cases, the need for visibility is almost never seeing everything all the time. It is you got to be able to see the right thing at the right time. And so there needs to be an underlying awareness. There needs to be a system that is aware of where things are in the context. But the actual human machine interface should only really be occurring when there is something that has happened or is going to happen or might happen that requires a decision to be made or an action to be taken. And so it's always got to lead to action. And you've got to work backwards from that to say, well, what action am I taking? Therefore, what decision do I need to make? Therefore, what insight do I need? Therefore, what visibility do I need, and when? And to get from big data to small data as quickly as you can in that process.
Yeah, it's great. And I think that's where technology can, when it's at its best, it's removing friction and shortening that gap, and allowing for automation to keep you focused on things where it matters, and not having to search for the potential problems, and I think that's what technology can bring to the table. And, the thought here around this conversation is being mindful around building out a tech stack for transportation, real-time transportation visibility, so that you're using the right tool in the right situation. There's so many different tools out there on the market. It's easy for someone to just check a box and just say, okay, we have some real-time visibility, whatever that may be, wherever that's coming from. But there's a lot of nuance at play there, and thinking about where you have the most risk and what tools and products and visibility solutions out there are most meaningful for those applications. I think if you're thoughtful there, then you can put together a tech stack that is going to be, cost-effective, resilient, and bring a lot of value to the table. So, and as we jump into that thought process, thinking about bucketing down the different types of visibility, and then we can talk about the different types of freight, kind of a freight mix, and then what it might look like to match those two up. And you can probably add to this list, David, but types of visibility that I think of could be something as simple as like phone calls, checking, like check calls, calling a driver. That is a type of visibility. Where are you? What's going on? What's this situation? There's a lot of technologies out there that can track assets, though. You have technologies to track the truck. There's ELD and the like, and there's also technologies for tracking trailers. And then there's technologies that can take multiple data streams and use algorithms to figure out real-time visibility across different modes of transportation, and that's a powerful solution as well. Then you have IoT tracking devices, and you also have predictive analytics, which are more robust, and with IoT you're getting visibility that is probably more dependable, but you can also have the potential to get visibility into context and conditions. Predictive analytics can give you some forewarning to what's coming next. But what are your thoughts on this list, David? And is there anything that you would add here?
Well, yeah, I think it's a great list. I think my first comment would be that predictive analytics is really an outcome of the bullets that sit above it, plus a few other ingredients that you need to throw into the bucket. And one is obviously the analytical tools, AI and other types of analytics, but also it's to think about other data streams that would need to be combined with real-time transportation visibility. And best example of that really is risk or context, is to understand the broader context of that particular shipment or that particular lane, so that you can understand, is there a risk to my on time and in full delivery? And that of course could be in real time to say that, you know, I'm in transit and something just happened to the truck, or it could be I'm in transit and something ahead of the truck, you know, a bridge has collapsed, or something else that's going to impact my ETA. Bad weather is the most obvious and frequent example, but also to be able to take that type of data and pull it back into the planning phase, and to be able to use predictive analytics with risk insights as part of that, to get a better sense of the risk to an on-time delivery. You know, you could call it a risk-adjusted ETA, if you will. And the advantage of the further ahead that you can do that, the better the chances are that there's actually something that you can do about it to fix the problem, or if you can't, which is often the case, at least to be able to communicate downstream to the recipient that the ETA isn't tomorrow at 2, it's tomorrow at 4, or the day after, so that they can then adjust what they are doing at their end, whether it's the, you know, dock scheduling or something else. And so that's where the value really comes. It's the data, it's multiple data streams, it's combining them in analytics, and then being able to communicate that insight to the right person and people at the right time, whether they're internal or external.
Yeah, it's great. And I think it's, you know, I always think back to being in a boxing match, right? And if you're in the ring and you don't see punches, if you're blindfolded and you can't see punches coming at you, you're helpless. You're just eating them, and you're probably unconscious on the mat in no time. But, you know, if you can see what's coming at you, then you can duck a lot of things, other things you can roll with it. And there's probably still going to be instances where you're knocked out, but at least you saw it coming and you knew about it, and you're able to kind of come to terms with it, you know, before it happened. But
well, it's like the Mike Tyson quote, isn't it? You know, that everyone's got a plan until they get punched in the face.
Exactly. And if you can have a plan for getting punched in the face, then you're probably even better off.
Right. Yep. But exactly. Good metaphor.
So moving on, like, you know, the different types of freight that are out there. And these are very broad buckets, you know. I'll start in the bottom left. You know, there's low value, low risk freight. You know, there's not a lot of dollar value on a truck, and the risk, there's not a whole lot of risk, right? There's not a big theft risk, or it's not, you know, sensitive to temperature conditions. You know, that's one bucket of freight. You know, then you have low value but high risk. You know, so this, you know, again, not a lot of value there, but maybe it is sensitive to temperature, it is cold chain, or maybe it is sensitive to shock or other, you know, theft or something of the like. Then you have high value, low risk, which is probably the smallest bucket here, where, you know, there's a lot of dollar, you know, value on a truck, but, you know, there's not a big theft risk. It's pretty resilient freight. You know, it's not going to be damaged by temperature or shock or things quite so easily. And then, of course, you have high value, high risk. You know, where you have a lot of dollar values. It's you know, very sensitive, you know, pharmaceuticals or, you know, types of food, or it's a high theft risk. So these types of buckets kind of demand, or you know, there's different visibility solutions that are probably most appropriate for each of these. And so I think looking at the previous slide of, you know, the types of visibility solutions that are out there, and then looking at the types of freight that make up what you're moving in your supply chain, can be a good exercise to start matching what's most appropriate. You know, what type of technology is most appropriate for location visibility for each of these buckets. Yeah, David, do you have any insights on this slide?
Yeah, I think looking at this through the lens of the freight and what it means to, you know, both, you know, the shipper and the receiver is a great way of kind of getting a better handle on where you need to spend more money, or where you can spend less money on real-time transportation visibility. I think I would add to this within a slightly broader context. There are other variables that are gonna push in a certain direction, generally sort of more up and to the right. For example, you're going to have customer criticality. There are some customers, and it could be to do with margin, it could be to do with time of the year, promotions, whatever it is, where it's just got to arrive in time, on time, and in full. And maybe the bottom right is an example of where it's not expensive, but it's mission critical. And service logistics, oil field services, project cargo, just-in-time manufacturing. There's a lot of examples where even if it's of insignificant physical value, if something doesn't show up on time and in full, everything else grinds to a halt. That is, we're seeing more and more of that as the demand from the customer goes up and capacity is lower. The risk of the knock-on effect of a delay or disruption is higher than it ever has been. And so that's another thing I think for people to take into account as they think about, how important is it that this arrives on time and in full? And if it doesn't, that I know that as soon as I possibly can.
100%, and I think that's where all these technologies have a dollar amount, right? Like no one in the freight tech space is handing things out for free that I'm aware of, so you have to think about like, where do you want to spend your money? Where do you need robust solutions? Like you said, for in the JIT space or high value, high risk, where you want an IoT tracker that's telling you precisely where something is located across any mode of transportation and giving you context information like temperature and letting you know when doors open and things like that. Where is that really needed? And then what parts of, what freight do you have in your mix where, something that's just location that's based off of, ELDs or something that's less expensive, I should say, maybe not going to give you as robust of a solution as an IoT device, but you can apply it across a broader, many more shipments for a lot less money. Where is that appropriate? And how can we blend these two so that you have that robust solution where you need it, and you have some visibility in other places for that kind of low value, low risk? So that's kind of the thought process that we have looking at both technology and a freight mix through this lens. But yeah, certainly that can be to your point, David, that can be a moving target, right? Because, one client could be a critical client and that can move low value, low risk freight into a different bucket because of the nature of that relationship. Or there could be multimodal freight where you want to understand what's happening in dray that could kind of move, change the risk assessment of different types of freight as well.
Yeah, I think your comment about multimodal is important, because I think network complexity comes into this as well. Is how difficult is it for me to get end-to-end visibility for this shipment versus that shipment? There are some shipments that are, single leg over the road, relatively straightforward. I do it every day, do it 100 times a day. And then there are others that, might be cross-border, multimodal, and, even if it isn't mission critical, I can't lose visibility to that for days on end. So that's a network complexity, and what the lane looks like is also a consideration.
And my guess, and you tell me if I'm right or wrong here, but those multimodal shipments that you're explaining right there, that's likely where you're going to start seeing a lot of issues when the market tightens. And if we go back into the pandemic, we've come out of that pandemic space, the market softened quite a bit. But if we go back in time a year and a half or so, when we were in the height of things, those multimodal shipments were a real booger. I mean, that was a real issue. Like, where is the problem taking place? Like, it's one thing to know that there's a problem and know where it is and know how to address it. It's another thing to say there's a big problem and I have no idea which leg that problem is really happening or where that problem is occurring.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, that was the challenge that everyone had with bottlenecks, whether it's unusual and extreme like, the Suez Canal, or whether it's something that was an ongoing problem, whether it be West Coast ports or some of the inland bottlenecks that essentially came after that and that we're still experiencing. What if, I'm knocking on wood here when I think about, averting, a rail strike, but bottlenecks can crop up very quickly. And the question that, so many thousands of companies were asking wasn't, is there a bottleneck there? We all knew there was a bottleneck. The question was, is my shipment in that bottleneck, or is it far enough back that I can divert it, or whatever action I can take? And obviously inventory planning becomes extremely challenging in those circumstances. And one of the ROIs from that shipment level visibility is to be able to be better and more agile when it comes to inventory planning.
Exactly. And then there's downstream effects that you're not anticipating too, right? I mean, everybody could be, oh, wow, there's a bottleneck at the port of LA. So like, let's all collectively send all of our shipments to the port of Oakland. And then the port of Oakland can't handle that volume, right? And then now there's a new problem and a new bottleneck. And so it seems like all these downstream implications that happened and these destabilizing events, they're just really hard to track. Like hindsight's 2020. We can all look back now and see everything that took place and better understand problems. But in the moment, you don't have that visibility into what's going on, then inventory management and all the downstream problems just start spreading. I think that kind of shed light, in my opinion, on the importance of visibility as a whole to understanding what's happening and how to go about risk mitigation. Like it's hard to have that conversation if you don't know where to focus it.
Right. Yeah, and a lot of companies are now talking about moving from just in time to just in case, which I think is the wrong way to think about it. If just in time is a good model, and it is a good model, it should be adapted to just in time plus, or just in time, risk adjusted just in time, so that you're taking these variances into account on top of the just in time model. If people don't have good visibility, they tend to overcompensate. And that's where you get yourself upside down in terms of more inventory, wrong inventory in the wrong place, as we're seeing now.
Yeah, imagine order everything everywhere and just store it in all the warehouses that solves one problem, but you're certainly creating a much, an equally large problem on the back end if you just have warehouses that are busting at the seams full of product, and that's its own issue.
Yeah, that's not going to end well.
Yeah. So just a few examples of just, what this could look like, like low mid-value freight, matching that up with asset tracking where you have, it's affordable, and it's good enough, right? It's a great tool. There's so many great tools out there for tracking drivers, tracking assets, understanding where trucks and trailers are at. These things can break down, if a driver is not compliant, or if there's a break in some sort of data stream coming from one of those assets, whether it's a trailer or a truck or a cell phone or something of the like. So there can be some disruptions here, but if you're using this across low mid-value freight, your risk from those disruptions is less, right? You're not relying on that type of tracking when you have $2 million in a truck or something of the like. And then, of course, IoT is going to be a better solution for something that's high value and high risk, right? If you have $1.5 million of pharmaceutical freight, or a big truckload of bacon, or something that's carrying a large dollar value to it, it's temperature sensitive, or it's impact sensitive, or it could be a theft risk, or all of the above. You're going to want to have something that's more robust, and that's where the more expensive types of tracking that also give you that real-time visibility into context and conditions can come into play. But all of those are sources of data, right? And I would imagine that data is more impactful when it is layered on top of other data. So instead of keeping data in silos, and saying, okay, here's our transportation data, here's our inventory data, here's the weather data, and so forth, the ability to take the kind of the back end data, whether it's coming off of IoT, whether it's coming off of assets or whatever, or both, and put that all in one place can be a good foundation, I would think, for analytics and predictive analytics. So yeah, what I think that's in your wheelhouse, David, of like what you can do with taking large amounts of data and putting it together to get useful and actionable insights.
Yeah, we love data. We love large amounts of data, but that's not what our clients want. They want insights. I mean, just before I go to that, thinking about the last two slides, I think the thing that we hear most in the market when we're having discussions about real-time transportation visibility is the pros and cons, or at least the differences between this idea of tracking the asset and being able to connect the shipment to the asset that it is on or is being hauled by, and how that as those networks continue to grow creates a low cost way of tracking shipments across an entire network. But because those networks are still growing, there's a challenge in getting to 100% compliance. So the only way to guarantee that a particular shipment is being tracked without reliance on an ELD and connecting all of the dots is to have a device that is attached to that box or that pallet, that shipment, so that it can be tracked through however many different modes of transportation it is being tracked. So in terms of the sort of the insights and the analytics side of this, I think the way to think about the tech stack is you've already got certain things. We'll take, for example, a TMS platform, and wherever the decisions are being made, whether it's planning or execution, and that's your go forward plan, that's the place to start. And then it's a question of, well, what insights do I want to see in that platform, and how can I get them? And how does the real-time transportation visibility play into that feed of data that is going to become insights and analytics? Am I going to be doing the analytics inside my TMS platform, or are these analytics that I need to create that are then going to be pushed into the TMS platform? And ultimately, you've got network data, you've got the shipment data, which is either real-time IoT enabled or it isn't, and then you've got the contextual data, call it the risk data. And the companies that we see being successful around decision-making, advanced decision-making in planning and execution, are those that have taken a view, starting with their existing platforms, thinking about the insights, how do they want to see those in the existing platforms, and what data do they need, and who's going to do the analytics to create the insights? Because ultimately, the planners and the dispatchers want to be able to see a very simple screen that says, look at this shipment and here's the problem, or here's what you need to be thinking about, or here are the actions that you can take. It really comes down to that, taking what are billions of data points and bringing it into a very simple, getting as close to a binary yes no as you can. And in some cases, that can be automated. We've seen examples of companies that are looking at refrigerated transportation and using analytics to decide whether or not to use refrigeration for that individual shipment. And it's saving money, it's reducing emissions and improving service. And they've been able to automate that. And that's ultimately how we see that the leading and more successful companies are approaching this. And they're doing that in partnership with companies that are providing risk analytics and IoT data, as well as the more traditional TMS platforms.
Yeah, it's great. And I think, like, I should have made a slide for this as well, but it seems like, it takes some time to gather data in some instances, right? Like, and with some visibility platforms, you're probably going to get a lot of data all at once. But when you're deploying IoT devices, it takes time. Like, you're usually going to be deploying those for a tactical use case, right? I want to understand where this shipment is located and the conditions that it's in right now. So you start off with just tactical risk mitigation of understanding where something is and the conditions that it's in at any point in any mode. But over time, you're collecting all of that data from all of these little nodes, all these little trackers that have been deployed on all these shipments throughout the course of the year. And you can aggregate that data in the background and you start creating a bit of a data lake. And that can bring to the surface some really interesting insights. Okay, this carrier had a lot of unexplained light alerts. Like, what is that about? Or this lane seems to be having more temperature deviations. Like, what is that about? And so you're getting this aggregated contextual or conditions data that's gathered over a long period of time that can then be added into other types of data, whether it's carrier benchmarking or network optimization projects. But that is, I think, like, it's a snowball, right? This whole data thing is, the more you're using it, the more data that you're collecting, the more insights and value that you're getting out of it. And so you kind of start with a tactical use case, you move into the analytical and strategic spot, and then that drives additional tactical use cases, such as what carrier is going to be best for this load of, that's high value, or what carrier is best for this other load that's low value, or so forth. But yeah, what are your thoughts on, like, what have you seen on your end for companies taking time to gather data in that way and starting to layer them from different sources, and what they've seen from that?
Yeah, well, there's an enormous amount of value to be created there, and I think one of the dynamics that we're seeing shifting is, because it's almost always somebody else who's moving things for you. There's always been a reliance by shippers on 3PLs and carriers, not just to execute the logistics move, but also to report back on where things are and performance. And of course, ultimately, the shipper is seeing, what arrives and when it arrives. But they've traditionally been blind to a lot of the dynamics behind that. Some of the sort of root cause analysis is really, being seen as sort of, well, the carriers and the 3PLs will deal with that. And more we're seeing the way that these tech stacks are coming together, particularly with embedded IoT devices that can be placed, on the cargo. It actually gives shippers direct line of sight to what is happening, not just in real time, but also in terms of how a carrier or a lane or a network, part of the network, is performing in a much more dynamic sense, so that there's obviously still annual and quarterly reviews with carriers and 3PLs, but there's also a lot of data in the interim that's allowing shippers to get a better sense of what's working and what isn't, and also why, and to be having more frequent discussions internally and externally about what to do about that. And it's a new opportunity in many ways for shippers, and it's an enormous one. And with the state of today's supply chains, it's one that it has to happen, and it has to happen as quickly as possible for shippers.
And I think that's like the importance of API too, right? Because you want all this data being piped in. You want to remove friction, and no one has the time to, or I feel like no one has the time to just pull some data out of this system, put it in a spreadsheet, pull some data out of it, and like do all this manual work to mesh the data together. But with API and webhooks and some of the technology that's out there today, you can seamlessly integrate all of this data, whether it's TMS data, tracking data, IoT data, and kind of bake it all into one place. And then you can overlay that into inventory and other things. And seeing some really cool things come onto the market right now that allow for that type of integration. And yeah, what have you noticed on your end on like kind of the latest and greatest and ways to bake in multiple data sources?
Well, I think the first is a fairly sort of basic and fundamental, but probably the most important bit, and that's the mindset of the technology providers. And what I mean by that is that there's no, as we've already described, there's no single solution that solves this visibility challenge for a shipper or a carrier or a 3PL. So it is a simple statement of fact that there have to be multiple solutions and data streams that come together. And so the solution providers that have a partnership mindset are the ones that shippers should be leaning towards. It's not the only factor. But you see, I love what Tyve's done with the Open Visibility Network, and there are that there are more and more companies that are trying to pull things together amongst themselves and create partnerships, and Everstream and Tive is an example of that, so that we can create a more sort of atomic integration, so that it's much easier for the 3PLs and the shippers to absorb that data, and really to be absorbing insights rather than data. There's, I can't think of a company I've met that says I want another system or I want more data. I mean, they might say they want more data feeds, but as you drill down, it's really, I want more insights, not more data. And so the more I think that solution providers can do amongst each other, and partner, not just in a go-to-market sense, but partner in a truly sort of data and integration sense, that helps them, and it helps shippers, and it moves the industry much, much faster forward. And there are some companies that, Chain.io's one where they're specializing in, exactly that, the integration, and removing that integration challenge as much as possible, because it's a huge amount of the inertia. The more that a large shipper has to do, the slower it's going to be, because there's always going to be competing resources for their IT spend in finance and marketing or whatever else. Clearly, supply chain has jumped to the top of the list, or close to it, in most companies in the last year or two. But the more that solution providers can integrate things on the back end, the easier it's going to be for shippers. And that's not just companies like Tive and Everstream, but it's also us having the sort of the perseverance, perhaps, but the mindset to partner with people like Oracle and SAP and the Infor and the larger platforms that we partner with.
Yeah, it makes me. I remember this is going back probably four or 5 years ago. I was visiting my cousin in London, and I remember going downtown, and the traffic was just backed up in London. I remember seeing 3 Lamborghinis or McLarens or just high-end exotic race cars, and they were just stuck in gridlock traffic. And the light would turn, and they would move up at about 10 miles an hour to the next light. And that comes to mind because I think so many companies are like, well, let's go get us some of that data. Let's go get some real-time data. And what they really want to do is go fast, and without being able to use and leverage that data to make it actionable and weave it together in a way where you're reducing friction and getting out of that traffic. You can have all the data in the world, but if you're in you could have that Lamborghini that can go however fast they go. I mean, they can fly, but if you're stuck in gridlock traffic, you're not going anywhere, And so I think like that's just the story that comes to mind, where the importance of removing that friction. And you might not have a Lamborghini. You might just have a Camaro or some other lesser sports car. But if you're in a wide open road and you remove the friction, you're going to get somewhere a whole lot quicker, and you're going to maximize the capabilities of the tools and data that you have.
Yeah, no, exactly. Delivering insights is the same as delivering a parcel. You got to look for bottlenecks. You got to work out, what's the lowest common denominator. No point in, having empty berths at the dock if you can't get things out of the back of the port. Same with developing insights. You got to look for, where is the bottleneck going to be in terms of delivering this insight? Is it with a TMS platform? Is it about getting coverage across my network with IoT devices? Where is it? And just be able to understand that, make that part of the plan. Move that aside as much as you can and set the right expectations.
Yep. And it makes me think of the word insight too, because when I think about insight, it's something, it's data or information coming to the surface that challenges some sort of assumption. Something, when you assume that something should be working the way it always has, or going the way that it should be, or operating in some way that's assumed. Insight is data that's coming to the surface and saying that might not be the case, or something might be different than what you think. And you have something empirical or something that's very hard and factual that's showing you that. That's my thought on insight. I don't know if you have any other way of defining that word or any other thoughts there, but
well, it's hard to take action on an insight if you don't trust it. And
Right.
yeah, I mean, no decisions very seldom have perfect data, but using data that you learn to trust and ultimately, create automation around it is critical. If the accuracy of the data is variable, it's difficult for people to make decisions around that because they're not sure that the data is correct. So data accuracy, insight accuracy is critical, because as humans, if we use something and it doesn't work, we're not going to use it again. So accuracy is absolutely critical in terms of building trust around some of these new data streams and insights.
Just moving to the last slide here, just some takeaways, and I think we have a few minutes before we jump into Q&A. No one size fits all visibility solution for everything, right? As you know, Kevin Hill and I used to talk about this on the podcast when I was at FreightWaves. Niches get the riches, like the technologies and the companies out there that are focused on solving specific problems are typically really robust and good at what they do. They're not trying to be generalist. And so I think that exists in location visibility as well, and that there's not just one big solution that solves everything. You need to be able to use multiple technologies and weave them together intelligently to provide a robust solution. So ways to do that would be, bucketing your shipments and understanding what shipments you have in each of these 4 buckets, and then matching them with the appropriate tool, and then trying to have all of that data API back into one single space so that you can see everything at once. And then utilizing predictive analytics as a way to kind of be proactive and anticipate what may be coming at you so that you can be ahead of the curve, so to speak. Anything else you'd add to that, David?
I mean, I think that maybe a more, a general wrapper I'd put around that is that and this is a gross oversimplification, but we've seen companies take 2 different approaches to visibility. One is an intentional, what is the why? What do we want to get out of it? What are the insights? And working backwards from that into the data that they need, and then diligencing where that data can best come from in terms of cost versus timeliness and granularity and veracity. The other are companies that have bought into visibility solutions, and of course they've had the sort of general discussions about the value of visibility, and they've said, right, we've got to have visibility, and we're going to go and get visibility, and they get visibility and they implement it, and then now they find themselves in kind of a sort of cycle of, okay, well, I've got a hammer, where's the nail? And it's a gross oversimplification, because they're getting value out of the platform or the data or the insights, but not as much as they would be getting if they'd been very clear about what are the different outcomes they want, what are the insights they need to support those outcomes, therefore, what is the data and where do they go and get that data from? And the answer to that is always going to be more than one place. And therefore, where you get it from, and the mix that you have, the tech stack, as you said, and how you integrate it is a critical part of that plan.
Yeah, it's what's the Sun Tzu quote that says, strategy without tactics is the slowest way to victory, and tactics without strategy is the noise before defeat, right? And so like you have to have, even if you're lacking on the tactical application, if you can at least have some thoughtfulness and strategy behind how you're weaving these things together, it's going to work better versus just grabbing everything all at once without really any thoughtfulness around what you're using and why, and having some focus. Then you end up with a whole lot of technology and you're using everything at about 10% of its capabilities, and it's not efficient. So yeah. I think we can move into Q&A, Katie. So I think if I've glanced down a little bit at the Q&A box. I've not looked at it in detail. So I will let you lead away from there.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you, guys. I think that was really insightful, and I especially enjoyed all the metaphors as well. That was fun. So, yeah, we've had a lot of really good questions come through. So I'll just kind of start at the beginning and dig into this, let you guys share your thoughts. So we had one person who pointed out that, another important question when facing these challenges is how much time do I still have to save my products? And along that same line, is it possible to further the prediction to trigger alerts before the events happen? Like an example is your temperature going high.
I can start with that in terms of, how much time that you're going to have to react. I think that's dependent on the type of freight and the situation. Like it's going to vary across the board. But one thing is if there's an excursion, if there's an exception of any type, the sooner you know about it, the better, right? And that's just regardless of how much time you have to react, you want to know about it as soon as possible. And then as far as the predictive part of that, I think, David, that would be in your realm. So I'll let you handle the predictive part of that question.
Yeah, it's I'm gonna try and take a 2-hour answer to that question and boil it down into 30 seconds. So I think the prediction side of it depends. It depends a lot on the type of risk, because there are some risks that are easier to predict or forecast than others. And I think you could break it down into sort of internal and operational risks versus external risks. So, I mean, the way that we approach operational risks is using enormous amounts of historical data to understand all of the different variables around lane and time and day and date and carrier, and to be able to create an operational risk score based on that. And so that can be done weeks in advance of the shipment departing. And it's an important part of the on-time predictive analytics. When you start thinking about external events, it's hard or impossible to predict that a bridge will collapse or that a theft will occur. You can indicate the propensity for a theft that might occur. Bridges are harder to predict, but there's a lot of risks that can be forecasted. I'll go back to weather. I mean, that's we have an entire meteorological team and predictive weather analytics for every lane, every node, every shipment, and that's an important part of the predictive analytics. So I think you can get a long way there in terms of improving on time, in full predictive analytics by including risk analytics in planning and execution. And we're seeing 90+% accuracy around those types of risk scores and risk adjusted ETAs. But there's always going to be things that happen that you just can't predict, and that's the importance of your real-time in-transit visibility, so that you can react as quickly as you possibly can. The worst thing is for the client to find out about a problem before you as the shipper does.
Okay, awesome. What about, can you guys share a few examples of the main solutions in the U.S.?
Yeah, it's technology, transportation, visibility solutions. I think there's, Project 44, there's Fork Heights, there's MacroPoint, Transporion. We partner with all of them. Of course, we also partner with Everstream. So there's a lot of players out in the marketplace. There's also a number of different, IoT providers. Of course, Tive is the leader in that space. And of course, my opinion here is biased, but I do believe that we're doing some really cool things and kind of leading the charge. But yeah, I think those would be some of your primaries. David, I don't know if you have anything to add to that list.
Yeah, I'll try and take a little bit of bias out of your last comment and advise companies when they're thinking about embedded cargo devices that there should be no bias, because there's a list of things to look at that go from type of communications, frequency and cost, and type of battery and everything else. So it should be relatively easy for companies to choose the right embedded cargo device. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of an open-ended question, and I think that there are a lot of providers out there. I think the key thing for companies to think about is, what are the key metrics in terms of data coverage and accuracy, and how do you measure that? And it can be difficult to do, but there's definitely more and more data in the market that allows that to be the case. And of course, there's enough companies in the market now that are using these solutions to be able to check in with them and see what their experience has been. But it's definitely a challenging time for the buyers to be thinking about the many different types of visibility solutions and the many different providers inside each of those types. I mean, obviously, we specialize in predictive risk analytics, which is it's a much smaller number of companies that do it, and we like that, and it gives us the opportunity to partner with Tive and a lot of other companies, because I said earlier, it really becomes valuable when you can combine risk insights with real-time transportation visibility and other data sources.
Sure. And kind of along those same lines, we've got another question here that's a little more specific to Tive. Richie, how does Tive ensure data integrity?
Yeah, it's a great question. So data integrity can be kind of seen as two different ways. Like, one is the data coming off of the devices accurate, right? Is our temperature gauge accurate? Is the location accurate? Is shock and light sensors, is there accuracy with the data coming off of the sensors? So in that sense, we have redundancy for location. We use GPS, as well as we have technology that can notice Wi-Fi modems anywhere in the world and use them as a way of determining location. And we use 5G, 4G, 3G, any type of cell phone tower can also be used. We have redundancy in place for the location. And then our sensors are, the thought behind how they are positioned inside of the device is there's a lot of thought went into that for the purposes of accuracy. And so we've gone through several different, accreditations and compliance measures, and been proven out to be extremely accurate across all of those. So there's a lot that went into the hardware to make sure that the data coming off is real and accurate. And in terms of data integrity, as far as what's happening with data inside the software, there's different types of things that you can look for, like SOC 2 compliance and other data integrity compliance standards that companies will, like Tive, we have that, and you can go and apply for these things and kind of prove to a third party that you're handling data in a thoughtful and careful way, and you have integrity in place. So those are things that you can look for that can kind of prove or show what a company is doing. So Tive has taken big steps in both of those departments to make sure that data integrity is there, and it's a key component of what we do.
Richie, I think you already touched on this a little bit in one of your other answers, but someone has asked, who are Tive's partners in the U.S. market? I don't know if you want to maybe list a few more.
Yeah, so we try to partner with, we do partner with a lot of companies, and the idea is, like, we have API and webhooks that allow for that tracker data to be pushed into any type of system that accepts that. So we partner with Project 44 and ForkHeights and MacroPoint and Transporion, and we have integrations into various TMS systems as well. And then that list is continuing to grow. We partner with Everstream. They're a great partner as well. So anywhere, oftentimes our partners have data sitting, whether it's other visibility data, or whether it's, a TMS system, whether it's an analytics platform, and that tracker data is able to push into those other platforms so it can be layered onto other data sources. So oftentimes that's what our partners look like. But that list is pretty extensive. You know, it's a whole lot longer, and I don't even know if I've memorized the whole thing at this point, to be honest.
Kind of have another list of questions here for you, or listing question, I should say. Rosalind wants to know which current data content would be best to manage the risk for optimizing future shipments. Can you list some of them?
Data content to manage the risk. Yeah, so that's a big question. I think there's a lot to unpack there. And I think a lot of it, you know, God and the devil live in the details, so to speak. So what type of shipments are being optimized? How do they need to be optimized? Certainly, like on-time delivery, you know, information and data is going to be helpful. Contextual data around, you know, is it temperature specific freight? Then, you know, aggregated temp data could help de-risk as well. But yeah, I think there's a lot to unpack there. David, what are your thoughts about that question?
Yeah, I would say it's yeah, you kind of take it from the top and work it down. You know, is it a localized risk like theft or temperature, or is it something that is external that might still be temperature, or you know, it could be lane risk. And then of course, you know, the list of risks is you know, we have 120 risk categories inside our incident monitoring analytics engine. So I'm not gonna run down that list, but certainly the most common types of in-transit risk tend to be associated with the lane. You know, they might be associated with the receiving or the sending DC or dock. You know, congestion, traffic. So it's a big question, but I think it's about kind of narrowing down, you know, what are the 2 or 3 that rise to the surface.
Great. Thank you, guys. That's really all we've got time for today. But of course, we want to give a huge thank you to Richie and David. You guys did a wonderful job with the presentation. That was a lot of great information for everyone. So thank you for that. Also, a big thank you to our friends over at Tive for sponsoring this production. I think it was wonderful. And obviously, a huge thank you to the audience, everyone that took the time to join us today. We're really glad to see you guys and have you engage with us. So that was wonderful. Just a quick reminder, we will be sending out a link tomorrow where you can view this presentation again on demand. So be sure to share it with your friends, share it with your colleagues, and we hope to see you guys next time. All right. Thanks so much.
All right.
Bye.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.